welcome to this webinar, Helping Vultures Soar Again. Some housekeeping rules, announcement. There's a question and answer section. Please do drop in your questions and answers, and then they will be answered at the end of the webinar. We're getting started now.
Okay, greetings all. I'm Kariuki Ndanganga, the head of conservation in Africa at BirdLife International. I take this opportunity to welcome you all to this exciting webinar titled Helping Vultures Soar Again. We sincerely thank you for availing yourself. This webinar is hosted by BirdLife International, the oldest international nature conservation organization or NGO, made up of 120 plus partners worldwide, 25 of these in Africa, where science leads our local action. It pinpoints where you work, and it helps us know which species need most help. Vultures urgently need our help, and the BirdLife Africa Partnership is providing that help. Where I come from, we have a proverb that says, the productive cow is praised after her death. Certainly, we don't like to be in a situation whereby our vultures would be praised only after they are gone. So we know that vultures are majestic, soaring creatures. They are popular among nature lovers. They are very helpful as cleanup crew of carcasses in African wildlands. They also clean up organic waste at dam sites. So we need to keep them soaring and cleaning up. In this webinar, we will hear about the challenges vultures are facing in our continent and beyond. You'll also hear from BirdLife partners from various corners of Africa on what we are doing to counter these challenges. We sincerely thank you for the support you have received from various, we also thank the various sources of support you have had. You have received funding for this work from various sources, including Tassel Leventis and the AG Leventis Foundation. We have also received support from Neville and Pamela Isdell and Cara Isdell Lee and the Isdell Family Foundation. Also the Band Foundation, the European Union's LIFE program, the IUCN SOS Africa Wildlife Initiative, the Champions of the Flower Initiative, and many individuals and groups that are supporting our work on vultures, including some of them becoming BirdLife species champions, and others who are responding to our appeals for vulture conservation through various donations. We thank you all, and we welcome you to this webinar and hope you are going to enjoy. I'll hand over to our moderator so that she can bring in the various panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kariuki, for that welcome note. So it's an exciting lineup of presenters that are going to be taking us through this webinar. So very excited to go through this. So on our list, we've got Roger Safford, who's the BirdLife International Preventing Extinctions Program Manager based in the UK. We also have Salisha Chandra, who's the Vulture Conservation Manager for the Africa Partnership. We also have Clara Nanja, who is based at Birdwatch Zambia, and she's going to be talking about vulture safe zones from the Zambian perspective. We're also going to be having Paul Gacheru from Nature Kenya, exciting. He's going to be talking about the rapid response mechanisms and community engagement that they are doing in Kenya. From Paul Gacheru, we're going to have Joseph Onoja, straight from Nigeria. Looking forward to that, exciting. He's also going to be talking on belief-based use. Watch out for this one, it's exciting as always. Samson Zeleke, who's going to be talking about electrocutions and collisions. So that's also going to be another exciting talk as well. And also going to be having Mohammed from Grepom. He's focusing on rehabilitation and rewilding in Morocco. And then last is going to be a session on an announcement that is going to be coming on the Vulture Conservation Forum that will be coming up next week. And we'll be excited to go through your questions and respond to them in the question and answer segment, which is going to be happening at 5:20 to 5:30, depending on where you are listening to and watching from the part of from the world. So off we go. Please sit back and enjoy, and make sure those questions keep coming through the chat box on the question and answer section. Enjoy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Roger Safford. I'm speaking to you from the UK, where I'm coordinator of BirdLife International's Preventing Extinctions programme. This is our programme to conserve the world's most threatened birds. Sometimes we find that whole sets of birds are in serious trouble, and the vultures are a case in point. They have become arguably the most threatened group of birds in the world. This is a situation many of us could not have imagined a few decades ago. There seem to be so many. But this makes them one of BirdLife's most serious concerns, and we're playing our part, doing local and national projects and working internationally. So I'm going to start off this webinar on helping vultures soar again by giving you some background on vultures, including their conservation in Asia and Europe, before I hand over to my colleagues to tell you about the situation in Africa and some of the BirdLife partner NGOs' work to tackle the problems. Having said this, we can only succeed by working together. And it's a pleasure to see the wonderful work many organisations, not only BirdLife, are doing to help vultures. Too many to list them all, but we appreciate them all, and we work with many of them. And we thank you too for listening. So vultures, they are magnificent, aren't they? They're awe-inspiring, and certainly to my eyes, they do have their own special beauty. And they are a unique and a distinctive part of our biodiversity. They're not only special, but they're also misunderstood heroes based on their unique ecology and the human benefits this brings. They are obligate scavengers. They live primarily, in most cases exclusively, by this way of life, alongside herbivores, predators, and other components of the food chain. Scavengers are vital. Just think for a moment of a world without them. They're a vital part of our natural ecosystems, acting as nature's cleaners, keeping our environment free of rotting carcasses. And they're supremely adapted to scavenging. You can see this externally with their soaring flight and many physical attributes from the beak to the feet. Internally, they're special too. They have extraordinarily acidic stomach juices and unique intestinal microbiome, that's the communities of microorganisms in their gut, allowing them to cope with and to digest food that we and many other animals couldn't. So they carry out an ecosystem service, as we call it, cleaning up carcasses and other organic waste in the environment. And this makes them one of the most directly and obviously useful species to humans. Declines are predicted to disrupt natural food webs and cause disease outbreaks. It's very likely that they help to reduce the transmission of disease of carcasses, because studies have shown that in the absence of vultures, carcasses can take at least 3 times as long, and sometimes much longer, to decompose. And the numbers of scavengers, the time they spend at a carcass, and the opportunities for disease transmission among those scavengers can increase threefold. Does this mean more human disease and more health costs where vultures have been lost? Well, maybe so. It's even quite likely in my view, but that is very hard to prove. On the other hand, there is no evidence that vultures are significant vectors, carriers of disease. They're also not immune to diseases. So as I hope I've shown, this type of illustration, stereotyping vultures as profiting from death and misery, is most unfair, but we still see it, and it's a shame, and we need to change that. But they're in trouble. So here's a quick overview of the diversity of vultures in Africa and Eurasia, and their status on the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. There are 16 species, and a shocking 8 of these, half of them, are critically endangered. That's as close as you can get to extinction. And 3 more are endangered. So why? Well, above all, vultures are threatened by poisoning. Mostly this is unintentional, trying to kill other animals, often carnivores such as wild cats and dogs or feral dogs. Poisoning can be intentional, targeting the vultures, and you'll hear about that later. In either case, what poisoning does is it often causes mass deaths because of the way vultures feed in groups. And there are a whole lot of other threats: electrocution, collision on energy infrastructure, habitat degradation, loss of food, disturbance, illegal hunting, and you name it. And you'll hear more about those later too. So let's look at the first vulture crisis, which happened in South Asia. The white-rumped vulture of South and Southeast Asia was once the commonest large bird of prey in the world, and there were an estimated 40 million vultures of 4 species in South Asia. They lived in an environment also known for very high human populations, and they thrived. They had an abundant, reliable, and safe food in the form of cattle and other carcasses, which were placed out at sites outside most towns and cities. And there was no significant persecution. But all 4 South Asian vulture species are now critically endangered. And they began to decline in the mid-1990s, rates of up to 50% per year. So they became the focus of determined conservation efforts across their ranges. But what to do when the cause was unknown? Well, find out, of course. That wasn't easy, but the cause was found, and it was unintentional poisoning, and it was caused by veterinary use on cattle of the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug diclofenac. But the declines were continuing, and at the low point, the white-rumped vulture had undergone a population decline of 99.9% in around 15 years. So conservation organisations were instrumental in getting the drug banned for veterinary use by governments across South Asia. And following this, BirdLife and its national partners became founding members with others in the Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction, or SAVE consortium, driving the recovery programme. Through SAVE and South Asian governments, vulture safe zones, areas in which threats are controlled within a 100-kilometre radius, allowing viable populations to develop, have now been established throughout South Asia. Captive populations have been established, and releases are now taking place. So the lesson is, you apply science-based action and results should follow. But as the graph shows, we have to be patient, as populations of such slow-breeding birds do not increase rapidly, whatever you do. But thanks to these efforts, which are continuing, the population of Asia's vultures are showing signs of stabilising, and indeed some are increasing. And we're also working to save the last vultures in Southeast Asia from poisoning. So what about Europe? A small area by comparison, but conservation success there has made it disproportionately important for more species of vultures. Many conservation techniques were used in situ and via reintroductions and translocations. So Spain in particular has shown how vultures can increase spectacularly while a country's economy also develops strongly. Look at that graph, conservationists' dream, and that's thanks to long-term effort, agreed priorities based on good science, good legislation and enforcement, adequate funding, European Union especially, and committed governments and NGO partners working together. But poisoning is still a threat here, so there's still much more work to do. So we know the problems, and we have solved some of them. Can we replicate the solutions and solve the rest? Well, this is where the Convention on Migratory Species may help us. This is an UN intergovernmental agreement bringing together many of the world's governments and vulture scientists and conservationists. And this convention produced the Multi-Species Action Plan to conserve African Eurasian vultures, encompassing the whole geographic range of the vultures to promote international conservation actions. It's been adopted by governments across the vultures ranges. It's being implemented in many areas, and it's being converted into national actions and plans. This matters because plans need to be owned by each country according to their own circumstances. So do we need this plan? Yes, we do. And this particular reason is that only governments can bring about the social and environmental changes on the scale that vultures need. And civil society has a big part to play in supporting this. Policymakers and the public, where vultures live and where they don't, must learn to love vultures as we do, if they don't already. And that is what International Vulture Awareness Day is about. So up to now, we've covered vultures in general and their conservation in Europe and Asia. Now it's time to learn about vultures and their conservation in Africa. Thank you.
Certainly, that's a very interesting way to start off this webinar, an overview of what's being done, and also that indeed the situation can be turned. Now we are switching over to Salisha, who's going to be talking about what's happening with the situation in Africa.
Hello everyone, I'm Salisha Chandra, the Vulture Conservation Manager for Africa at BirdLife International, speaking to you from Nairobi, Kenya. Following on from Roger's presentation, I'm excited to share with you a glimpse into the vultures that soar across the skies of Africa, the threats they face, and an overview of the work that the BirdLife Africa Partnership is undertaking to address these threats, before I hand over to my colleagues to give you a more in-depth view into the actions that they are implementing. As Roger shared, the 16 species of Old World vultures found across Europe, Asia, and Africa are diverse and glorious. Of these, 11 are found in Africa, and unfortunately, 7 are on the edge of extinction. 6 of these vultures are endemic to Africa, i.e. only found here. First, we have the medium-sized white-backed vulture. Though it is one of the most widespread and common of vultures, it is critically endangered, having suffered extremely rapid declines of approximately 90% over the last 50 years. Then we have the hooded vulture, also critically endangered, with an estimated 83% decline over 3 generations. These are highly versatile scavengers, often found near human habitation, especially in West Africa. Third is the glorious highest flying bird in the world, the Repels Vulture, with a recorded flying height of over 11,000 meters. And for those that can relate, that's more than double the height of Mount Kilimanjaro. Repels nest in cliffs and are also critically endangered, declining at 97% over the last 50 years. Moving to the bottom left of my screen, we have the shy and smaller white-headed vulture. Often first to arrive at carcasses, it has to wait for the larger species to move off before feeding. These are also on the critically endangered list, declining at the alarming rate of 96%. Then we have the Cape vulture, which is endemic to Southern Africa and a cliff nester. The pale-looking Cape vulture arrives at carcasses with a lot of aplomb. Harsh grading calls, wings outstretched to appear larger. They are considered endangered due to estimated population declines of 92% over the last 50 years, though some populations in South Africa are reportedly increasing. And the last of the 6 vultures only found in Africa is the palm nut vulture. This one is of least concern, and as its name suggests, unusually for a bird of prey, it feeds mainly on the fruit of the oil and raffia palms. So that brings us to the other 5 vultures that range across Africa and Eurasia. Starting on the bottom right of the screen, we have the endangered Lapid-faced vulture, whose populations are declining at over 80%. This quirky, gentle giant is one of the largest and most powerful of the African vultures, with a large wingspan of almost 3 meters. On the other end of the scale, we have the smaller Egyptian vulture, also endangered, as it's declining across its entire range. An opportunistic feeder, it has a varied diet and has been seen to use tools, such as repeatedly dropping stones to break open eggs. Then we have the bearded vulture, also known as the lammergeier, a near-threatened species that feeds mostly on bones and marrow. It is an unmistakable bird with its black sideburns and large presence. It works very hard to achieve. meticulously applying dirt with its claws to get a nice orange glow befitting its status. Another large old vulture present in Africa is the Griffin vulture. Due to its increasing populations in Europe, it is considered of least concern, though in North Africa, the populations are declining and also non-breeding. Lastly, we have the near-threatened Saneris vulture, or black vulture. This is very rarely found in Africa, with few irregular observations in Egypt and West Africa. Sadly, these ecologically important creatures are the most endangered group of birds in the world. This fact cannot be overstated. Africa's vultures are the most endangered group of birds in the world. Their declines are driven by a myriad number of cross-cutting threats, which vary from region to region. Firstly, we have poisoning. This is the most pervasive of all threats and is responsible for 61% of recorded vulture deaths across Africa. Poisoning happens at two levels. The first is unintentional and largely occurs as a result of human-carnivore conflict, where depredated livestock carcasses are laced with poison to kill the carnivore in retaliation. Unfortunately, vultures descend en masse and die in large numbers. It also results from lead accumulation from feeding on carcasses with lead bullets, as well as feral dog population control measures and cyanide runoffs from mining operations. Then there is intentional poisoning, when vultures are the target. Here, poachers poison carcasses of poached animals so that their location is not given away by the vultures, who act as sentinels of the sky for rangers in the field. Unintentional poisoning occurs mostly in East and Southern Africa, and intentional poisoning mostly in Southern Africa. Next, we have killing for belief-based use, where people trap or poison vultures and use their parts to cure ailments or provide them with magical powers such as foresight and long life. This primarily happens in West Africa, but is also threatened parts of East and Southern Africa and is responsible for 29% of vulture mortalities. Thirdly, we have the threat of electrocutions and collisions. This currently accounts for 9% of vulture mortalities, but is considered a growing threat due to the increased emphasis on electrification and wind energy across the region. Lastly, 1% of vulture mortalities are attributed to other causes such as egg harvesting and killing for meat. Overarching all of these is habitat loss and degradation. Though it's hard to extract how much of the decline these drive, we know that it leads to less food, less sites for nesting and roosting, making it difficult for vulture populations to thrive or even survive. So what are we doing about this hugely complex issue? BirdLife Africa's vulture conservation strategy is built on 4 pillars: knowledge and planning, awareness raising, policy and advocacy, as well as actions on the ground. In terms of knowledge and planning, building from the multi-species action plan, we're working with our partners and other stakeholders to monitor vulture populations, assess threats, and develop country-level vulture action plans. For example, understanding the poisoning hotspots in Kenya allowed targeted action on the ground. And in South Africa, in-depth research helped confirm that lead bullets are indeed a cause of vulture mortality, leading conservationists to encourage game reserve managers and hunters associations to promote the use of lead-free ammunition. Using various media, awareness of the crisis has been raised at local, national, regional, and international levels. Importantly, local ambassadors have been nurtured in Kenya, Nigeria, and Zimbabwe, for instance, who share their knowledge and understanding of the role and value of vultures within their communities. Furthermore, critical collaborations have been formed with stakeholders such as Project Ranger, which help raise the plight of vultures and the need for their conservation amongst different audiences. On the advocacy front, much work has gone into instituting vulture-friendly policies in the various range straits, including national action plans discussed before, but also through engaging with regional and international bodies such as ECOWAS and CITES to highlight the illegal trade in vulture parts. Building on knowledge, awareness, and advocacy, conservation approaches have been trialed on the ground. actions to combat poisoning have largely been implemented in East and Southern Africa, with a focus on reducing mortality from poisoning, as well as reducing poisoning incidences themselves. Overall, this has included wildlife poison response training for our partners in 9 countries, development of response protocols in 3, with associated national poisoning incident databases and countless community engagement initiatives. Taking a leaf from the successes in Asia, the vulture safe zone concept has been adapted to the African context, and now we have approximately 500,000 hectares of vulture safe zones established in Zambia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa. These vulture safe zones are areas free from the key threats to vultures, particularly in areas where vultures need significant protection, and are created through encouraging and supporting the key stakeholders, such as land managers, landowners, and community members. Also on the lines of creating safe spaces for vultures, our partner in Morocco runs an aviary and rehabilitation center where vultures are provided with safe and supplementary food and treated and rehabilitated as needed. To mitigate the effects of poor energy infrastructure, BirdLife partners have worked to identify dangerous power lines in both Morocco and Ethiopia. In Ethiopia, plans are underway to retrofit these lines, and in Kenya, BirdLife International are coordinating a group of bird conservation organizations and implementing critical conservation activities to offset the effects of a wind farm sited near vulture colonies. We have also started to work on demand reduction strategies to address the killing of vultures for belief-based use. Our partners in Nigeria and Zimbabwe are engaging with traditional healers to understand the demands for vulture parts and promote the use of alternatives. Additionally, we're also working to understand the trade routes, drivers, and motivations for killing of vultures in Guinea-Bissau, Gambia, and Senegal, following the mass deaths in this sub-region over the last 2 years. 5 years into our strategic action plan, the BirdLife Africa Partnership has made progress in implementing its strategy. And while we know the journey has just begun, we are in it for the long run to help Africa's vultures soar again. And we couldn't have done this without the support of many of you listening today, so thank you. Now I will hand over to our partners from across Africa who will provide an in-depth focus on the various actions implemented so far and what lies ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Salisha, for that overview of what's happening in Africa and the efforts across the African region to combat the threats to vultures. Now we're going to be listening to Clara Nanja, who's going to be talking about the focus on vulture safe zones in Zambia. Over to you, Clara.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Malasa. I'm from BirdWatch Zambia. I am the Species Conservation Officer as well as Project Officer for the Vulture Conservation Project. I will just be sharing with you an overview of what the Vulture Safe Zone initiative has been like here in Zambia and what we have been able to achieve. Firstly, I'll start by defining what a vulture safe zone is. A vulture safe zone is basically an area in which targeted conservation measures are undertaken to address the key threats relevant to vulture species present. And this in turn complements national and international efforts. This is basically an area that is poison-free, that is safe for vultures, that is a safe breeding and roosting area, an area where vulture threats are controlled voluntarily by land managers and land users. A vulture safe zone can be a game ranch, a game farm, a mixed farm, dairy farm, etc., where vulture populations are already present or frequenting the area. So what happens in establishing vulture safe zones is that BirdWatch Zambia comes into partnership with landowners where we raise awareness of the importance of vultures and also influence land management practices in these areas to favor vultures. And by favoring, I mean to get rid of human-induced threats such as persecution, poisoning, etc. In these areas, safe food is put out for vultures to feed, and by doing so, This reduces the chance of vultures being poisoned as they feed, or increases the chance of vultures coming across safe food rather than poisoned food. This initiative was first pioneered in India and piloted in Africa first by Birdwatch Zambia in partnership with BirdLife International and local farm and game reserve owners who are landowners at these vulture safe zones. This is an example of what we do when we establish a vulture safe zone. We brand it, and this picture here just shows the branding at one of our vulture safe zones, which is a game reserve in eastern Zambia. We do customize these. We do customize the branding to the area. So in this case, this is a game reserve. So we are talking about poaching, cutting down trees, etc. So this is just an example of one of the branding that we have done for the vulture safe zones. In total, we have established 6 vulture safe zones, which translates to 109,000 hectares in total of land that is dedicated to vulture safe zones in Zambia. But we have 2 vulture safe zones pending branding. One, which is a game ranch, and the other, which is a hunting concession in one of the GMAs in our project area, the Kafia National Park. Activities that we undertake here in the vulture safe zone, we have been able to do some tree planting activities where we just encourage landowners to also, apart from not cutting down trees, to take time to plant trees and also to support them as they plant trees. And this encourages a good number of trees where vultures and other birds can perch or use these trees. We have also, in the vulture safe zones, we have conducted some tagging. So one of the importance of these areas, what we have seen as Birdwatch Zambia is these areas have become important research areas where we are now doing our monitoring of vulture population as well as tagging our vultures. So the pictures you see on the left are just the Birdwatch Zambia team tagging with one of the vulture safe zone land managers at Mnyamazi Game Reserve. And this tagging was done there at our vulture safe zone. The picture on the right is just to show you the movements of one of our tracked birds. The progress that we have been able to see so far is that communities have become more aware of the vulture crisis. They have become alive to the fact that there is a crisis and that they are also responsible in making sure that our vulture populations are retained and that they are not lost. Apart from this, from the awareness, we have seen that some myths around vultures have been debunked. So communities have now become more aware. Vulture threats we see now are being controlled voluntarily by landowners. People who are on the ground are not waiting for us to go there and do this work. We have seen commitment to save vultures by these landowners and the people that are found in these vulture safe zones, where they have taken up the responsibility to just do this work, even though Birdwatch Zambia is not there to monitor. They also monitor and send us information on vultures and the numbers and what species they are seeing there. If there are any tagged birds, they share that information with us. We have also seen a steady population of vultures in these areas. It is a short space of time since the beginning of the vulture safe zone to determine if the vulture population is going high or increasing or decreasing. And I say so because there is a lot of dynamics that come at play when looking at whether a population is decreasing and increasing. But one thing we can confirm is that the vulture populations are stable in these areas. And from what we have seen from the maps, vultures are actually just mostly feeding from these areas and spending time elsewhere. So when we are doing our monitoring, it could be that some populations are at other vulture safe zones feeding there, because we in central Zambia, we have a concentration of vulture safe zone in one area. So when we are doing the monitoring, say in one area, the population could be in the other one. So all in all, we have seen a steady population in these areas and the areas around vulture safe zone. We have also noticed or taken note that the vulture safe zones have become important research areas for us as Birdwatch. As I mentioned earlier, this is where we do our tagging. This is where we have been able to do our monitoring. And lastly, these have become important places of excursion. In 2018, we commemorated Vulture Awareness Day with school pupils from Chisamba, Central Zambia, where we visited one of our vulture safe zones just for the pupils to go and see vultures. So we see that these places are also important for people to just experience vultures and appreciate them, experience them in real time, especially those that may not have access to protected areas, or those that may not have access to visit game reserves, game ranches, etc. So that in a nutshell, these are the positives that we have recorded so far. And also to emphasize that our partners are really keen on conserving vultures, such that they share information with us, information like drugs that they're administering to carcass to their animals, their cows, before they put them out to feed. So for us, this is a positive. What would make the most impact going into the future is firstly expansion of these vulture safe zones to other areas of the country, other areas of the continent, continued awareness raising in these areas. We continue to raise awareness on the crisis and debunking the myths around. And lastly, what would make the most impact going forward is for governments to recognize vulture safe zones, to talk about them, to call upon partners who would like to be part of this initiative, and also to supplement our efforts as Birdwatch Zambia. I will end by saying, let us help vultures soar again. It is all our responsibility to make sure that these birds are in our skies. Thank you.
Thanks to Mary for what's happening in Zambia and updating us on the vulture safe zone. Thank you so much, Mary. And over to Paul Gacheru from Nature Kenya, speaking about rapid response mechanisms and community engagement in Kenya.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Paul Gacheru, and I'm here to present to you about our vulture conservation program in Kenya, where we engage the local communities in promoting this conservation of this iconic African species. As a way of introduction to who we are, Nature Kenya is the East African Natural History Society founded in 1909 to promote the study and conservation of nature in the East African region. We are a membership organization and we derive our strength from our membership. And here in Kenya, Nature Kenya is a BirdLife international partner. As you are all aware, vultures are facing significant threats within our region, and key to it is in wildlife poisoning. And you have had articles published within our media of big cats being poisoned because of human-wildlife conflict. This is from the Marsh Pride, famous Marsh Pride within the Masai Mara region. We have had cases of lions being poisoned in the Wa landscape in Tanzania, and also within the Uganda as well. We have seen lions being poisoned as a result of human-wildlife conflict. And why are we concerned about this? Is because having studies being done on vulture movement within the region, being done, which has been carried out by the Peregrine Fund, we have seen that vultures are wide-ranging species. And in particular, why I mentioned Uganda or I mentioned Tanzania is because, as you can see here, the Repels Vulture has a huge ranging area which cuts across the 3 countries, and you can see other birds as well, which are cutting across multiple boundaries within our countries. And therefore, this is quite of importance within our program. And the linkage between lions or big cats and or carnivores and vultures is closely intertwined, because vultures being scavenging birds and rely on prey or prey that has been killed by carnivores within the landscape. And therefore, scenes like this of vultures and carnivores being found together is very likely is likely within our landscape. And as I've mentioned, part of the key drivers to wildlife poisoning within our landscape, within our landscape is human-wildlife conflict, human-carnivore conflict in particular, whereby big cats or carnivores like hyenas have been documented to significantly impact and kill livestock within the landscape. And in particular, this year, within the landscape that we work in, between January and June, the community has lost $100,000 as a result of conflict with big cats and carnivores in particular. And this is a huge burden for the community to bear, because we do not have compensation schemes within our country where the community can be compensated for the losses incurred by wildlife, and therefore the burden is upon their shoulders to be able to bear. And therefore, this by itself is a significant driver towards changing of influencing perception and attitudes of wildlife. And for a farmer who has lost 50 sheep, 50 goats, this number of cows, the anchor behind and the results or the actions being taken, which would be taken towards venting this anger, results to wildlife poisoning. And we have seen and we have learned that this cycle of wildlife poisoning comes first from a human-life conflict and using readily available pesticides, using the livestock as bait, the carcasses of livestock as bait, and eventually this does kill a score of different species of wildlife, and in big numbers, vultures within our landscape. And working with scientists, we have come up with this cycle of poisoning and predicted poisoning cycle, and how then we can be able to respond effectively to poisoning incidents. And as a result of this, nationally in Kenya, we have developed a response protocol to wildlife poisoning incidents, which was done collaboratively with partners, which provides a guiding framework towards responding to wildlife poisoning incidents within our country. And this is a relatively recent development, which is at least around 2 years old. And it has been promoted within the national, at the national level for adoption and implementation. And so far, there has been training which has been conducted to personnel, KWS personnel, conservancy personnel, national resource personnel, on how to effectively adopt and implement the poisoning response protocol to effectively respond to poisoning incidents, and therefore minimizing deaths that would result to the poisoning events. But core to it is community engagement, which because as you mentioned earlier, the community are the ones who bear the brunt of human life conflict, and they're the ones who do poison. Even as you're targeting the authorities and the conservancy, we still need to go to the grassroots to be able to engage the local communities so that they can effectively minimize and stop wildlife poisoning at the household level. And therefore, reaching out to the communities through engaging through awareness creation events and delivering anti-poisoning campaigns and messaging on why we should stop wildlife poisoning, and provide and guiding them and showing them the cycles of wildlife poisoning and how poisoning is non-discriminatory, that poison would remain within the community and this can affect a household, have been key messages that have been delivered at the different regions that you're working in as we engage our local communities. But this has not been enough, because reaching out with community awareness, we see there is still need to be able to entrench community champions or at village level that will be able to promote and engage and participate towards safeguarding these species. And therefore, community engagement through citizen science, where we are engaging local volunteers, we call them vulture volunteers, who have been very instrumental in human-life conflict data collection, and increasing surveillance and supporting in rapid response to wildlife poisoning, and linking the authorities and linking with the authorities on effectively responding to poisoning incidents, as well as actively participating in awareness creation within their area. And the reason I say increasing surveillance which has rapid response to poisoning incidents, this is important because with the skills that is imparted to them, they are able to decontaminate or link with authorities to get authorizations of decontaminating a scene within their locations. And as a result of this, of increased surveillance, we have seen heightened and increased response time, which has helped in mitigating further wildlife deaths within the landscape. For example, an incident which happened late last year, where there was a hyena poisoned, which eventually killed a hyena which was poisoned and died. 7 vultures fed on the hyena, which died. But because of having a local network of volunteers, they were able to pick up this incident and be able to decontaminate the scene, mitigating further loss of wildlife within their landscape. And with that, we have seen that community engagement is yielding positive results. And one is reduction of poisoning incident, poisoning within the landscape, and as a retaliatory option to human wildlife conflicts. This has helped to help also to derive also that we are seeing that there's increased tolerance to wildlife, though this should not be taken as or it should not just be taken on, it should be taken at face value, because there's still more work to be done to ascertain some of this, especially on tolerance on wildlife. In addition to this, we have seen communities adopting best practices to mitigate human wildlife conflict incidents, whereby there's improved livestock reinforcement, livestock enclosure reinforcement, and as well as improving livestock herding practices to mitigate and to minimize livestock losses in the field. And this is through lesson sharing with different communities across the landscapes on how best to ensure that livestock is not lost in the grazing fields. This is very important because then it helps in increasing tolerance to wildlife within the landscape. So moving forward, what is required? There is still need to ensure that we have better regulations on use of readily available pesticides and policy frameworks that helps in addressing human wildlife conflict, and especially elements due to compensation, because that is always a thorny issue in our country. Secondly, is to be able to help and find innovative ways to address human wildlife conflict incidents within the landscape. And then there's need for continuous building capacity of stakeholders to be able to effectively respond to wildlife poisoning incidents, and ensure that we continue community awareness on the dangers associated with wildlife poisoning. And finally, continually to create champions at grassroots level who would be able to champion water conservation and wildlife conservation within their landscape. And this, we still have a long way to go, but we have made positive strides towards being able to safeguard our vultures within our landscape. And this work is done not by one institution, but collaborative with multiple institutions, and we acknowledge them in this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. From those lessons coming out of Kenya, fantastic to hear about the community engagement. In our next presentation, we are going to be having Joseph Onoja, who is the Director of Technical Programs at Nigeria Nature Conservation, and is going to be talking to us about belief-based use. Joseph, over to you.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to present to you vulture conservation issues in Nigeria, combating belief-based use of vulture parts in traditional medicine. To take you through the introduction, the major cause of decline in vulture in Nigeria was thought to be used for traditional belief, and this was confirmed by preliminary market surveys. And as the Nigerian Conservation Foundation, being the BirdLife international partner here in Nigeria, we got into that to ensure that we play our part in a local level while trying to curb the global concern, as my colleague had earlier mentioned. So in terms of advocacy plan, we started that in 2015, where we developed a vulture advocacy plan to respond to the call on the decline of vulture. And this advocacy plan was shared with the BirdLife Secretariat in Nairobi, and we were able to get some funds from the Ventis Foundation when we implemented vulture decline in West Africa, breaking the trend through stakeholders' engagement in Nigeria. This was done between 2017 and 2018. And this project was a pioneer effort at engaging different stakeholders to see in the value chain, in the trade value chain, to see what we can do or what we can learn and how we can nip the the driver of the decline of vulture in Nigeria. And the belief-based use was identified as the chief driver, because we visited about 17 wildlife markets across the southwestern part of Nigeria in Ogun, Osun, and Ondo states, where we engaged over 3 stakeholders, both actors and non-actors. We went further to engage the transport ministry, law enforcement agents, traditional healers, and market women as well. And the survey revealed that vulture parts have local and international roots for as far as Burkina Faso, Niger Republic, and Cameroon. And we found out that a live vulture costs between 85 to 140 US dollars, and then the dead one will be between 40 and 60, depending on the availability and the location. And these are some of the pictures that we found out during the market survey that we carried out in the Southwest. And not only vultures that are found in that market, also found some animal parts as well. So the demand for African vulture and its parts is very high, which is largely driven by belief-based use. And the result also showed that inter-border agency and other law enforcement agencies also lack the knowledge required to combat this wildlife crime, because in our engagement with them, we saw that gap, and we saw that gap, and then we planned on dealing with that. So the project, to a large extent, was able to create some level of awareness among the targeted stakeholders, where we had 15 dialogue sessions, 3 stakeholders workshop, and we had jingles both in television and in the radio, and we had the Save the Vulture campaign materials printed as well, which we believe that this campaign reached an estimate of over 1 million people because of the digital platform that we shared this information. And the project also leveraged on tackling illegal wildlife trade, as well as we saw in that picture in the market. It's not only vultures that are being traded upon, but wanted to also deal with illegal wildlife trade. And then we found out that there are holistic intervention that will address the knowledge gap is very important, is very needed. And strengthen the capacity and awareness of law enforcement agents was also seen as a priority, while domesticating our existing laws, such as the CITES and Endangered Species Act of 2016. And then we went further to get in collaboration with our partners from the Balkans all the way to Nigeria here, we got the EU Life Egyptian Vulture grant, where we went on to implement that. And this project sought to increase the conservation of not only the migratory vultures species between Europe and Africa, that is the Egyptian vulture, but also other vulture species as well. And as I said earlier, it fits nicely into NCF's advocacy plan, and when we continued our engagement of stakeholders. So the main objective of this project was to reduce adult mortality through persecution for traditional medicine, and to increase awareness for the conservation of Egyptian vulture and other vulture species. 10 wildlife markets were visited this time around in the north states of Kano and Sokoto. I also visited veterinary practitioners as well. And in Kano State, we visited 12 shops. Over 500 wildlife shops were seen, and then we had similar prices also with what is happening in the southwest in terms of the prices of vultures. One significant thing that we saw that this trade is inherited. from sometimes we found 3 generations of a grandmother, her mother, and the daughter. The grandmother, the daughter, and the granddaughter all involved in the trade and have their shops side by side. And we found out that they use this, just like we found in the Southwest, rituals, right, to cure evil attack, hunted for domestic food and good protein supplement. Vulture eggs also used for money-making rituals and to cure madness as well. And as I said, the source also is from Chad Republic, Jigawa, Yobe, and even as far as Burkina Faso, as I had mentioned. And in this market also, we found other wildlife species. And the method of harvesting, trapping for life supply, poisoning for dead supply, and sometimes shooting to supply dead supply and also parts supply. So in Kebbi State, we also found the same thing. But the interesting thing about Kebbi State is that we got involved with the National Association of Nigerian Traditional Medicine Practitioners, and we started discussing the possibility of plant-based alternatives, which they also are looking forward to, because they are saying that they don't have vultures as much as they used to have in time past in our engagements with them. So they are open to that. So these are areas, these are new frontiers where we are hoping to conquer, to use plant-based alternatives, plants that are readily available, not the one that will be driven to extinction because of the use. And in terms of the collection of veterinary data as well, we identified 23 drugs, mostly are antibiotics that are used, and they are controlled drugs, but they are being used in the black markets. So the main drivers for poison of those drugs are for feral dog control and to control wild carnivore population, like for instance, jackals and foxes, and also poisoning at rubbish sites. So a follow-up with that, we did a communication plan, so where we'll be able to engage school children to try to create awareness. This was during a Wetlands Day in a place where the Egyptian vulture was thought to have its range as well in northern parts of Nigeria. We also had bead balls placed in our airports, and we have a mile for vultures as well that we had to just to create more and more awareness. So in following up with that, we got the U.S. Fish and Wildlife grants in combating the West African illegal trade in threatened vultures and their parts for belief-based use as a follow-up with all of the vulture work that we have been doing. So the main goal of this project was to reduce by 20% the illegal trade of vulture parts from the highly threatened vulture species. And we're hoping that we'll be able to also strengthen law enforcement agents and identify alternative tradable products. So this was done with an inception meeting where we called different people together, even the traditional healers themselves, embassies, and different focal points from the government, so that we'll be able to all sit down in one place and see how we can forge a way ahead in conservation of vultures. And this is being done through the improvement of capacity of special criminal investigation agencies to monitor, investigate, and prosecute illegal wildlife trade and related crimes as well. So far, we engage traditional healers and hunters on seeking alternatives to vulture parts, which look promising, as I mentioned earlier. And we also engaged veterinary practitioners as well to see how we will be able to develop, how we'll be able to curb the use of these traditional, the different parts in here, we're able to curb them, so that we'll be able to see how we can control these drugs that are not to be used. At the end of the engagement with tribal healers, a 6-point communique was developed, and seeing how we'll be able to still talking about the plant alternatives that we can use with the traditional healers that we have. In trying to ensure that we get the buy-in of the general populace, we engaged 3 Nigerian ambassadors, what we call them special vulture ambassadors. These are what we call the music stars and entertainment people who have a large followership, and they are able to work with their followership to create more awareness about vultures. And that's an area we found that very useful. And a lot of people, a lot of their followership have known more about vultures, which is something that is quite interesting, and we're hoping to even explore more. So what we're trying to do now is see how we'll be able to create further vulture safe zones. We're able to know estimates of, especially the hooded vulture, which are still very much available in Nigeria. We need to know the national estimate, and we also need to engage the traditional healers and also develop even the plant alternatives even more, even as we continue to work with them to change their beliefs in that. So this is a brief of what we are doing in terms of vulture conservation in Nigeria as we act locally to have a global impact. Thank you very much for listening. want to thank all our sponsors and for all the things that we have done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for that perspective coming out of Nigeria on the belief-based use and working with traditional healers and all the work that is going on there. Coming up now is Samson Zeleke from Ethiopian Wildlife and Natural History Society. He's the communications officer, and he's going to be giving us his talk from his institution. Go ahead, Samson.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Samson Zeleke, and currently I'm working as a communication officer at EWNHS. If this is your first time to be introduced to Ethiopian Wildlife and Natural History Society, it is a BirdLife partner in Ethiopia, which has worked for more than 50 years. And today I'll be dealing with electrocution and collusion of vultures from the Ethiopian perspective. As my colleague earlier mentioned, 9% of vulture deaths is contributed or attributed to electrocution and collusion, and that would be my focus area. And before presenting you with such particular data and regarding in Ethiopia, I would like to contextualize these two terms. So electrocution is an incident where closely phased wires kill birds while perching or trying to fly away, while the term collusion used to explain where birds come in contact with powering structures while they are flying. So these are the schematic diagram where you can see the different setup. However, it's still killing them in 8 different ways. So it's hugely important to consider this while implementing energy infrastructure. When we come back to the recent data that we collected, we made a survey in December 2019, which is within a very short period of time, and we managed to inspect more than 200 kilometers of dangerous power lines, and we found that more than 30 vultures died, out of which 11 were Egyptian vulture and 26 other vultures. So this will tell you how important it is, because this part of the survey is in eastern part of Ethiopia, and it's a very small area. Imagine what it would mean when it's extrapolated for the entire nation. Parallelly, Ethiopia aims to increase the power generation capacity. Now it is almost 2,000 megawatts to 10,000 megawatts in a short period of time. So this would mean extra power distribution lines and extra power infrastructures, and you can also imagine how many birds will end up in catastrophic scenarios in a very short period of time. So it is paramount that WNHS and its partners work together to bring some positive change. That's why the first step were made recently by making a quadripartite agreement with Ethiopian Electric Power, which produces the power, and Ethiopian Electric Utility, which is responsible for the distribution and marketing of the power produced, while Ethiopian Wildlife and Conservation Authority is responsible to overlook the entire wildlife conservation situations in the country. Following that, we also made a rapid assessment. These rapid assessment were made in collaboration with EV New Life project as well as MSP project, but also we managed to engage with EEP and EU office bearers to see how it is really affecting the bird life. So I want to take your focus in Matara town, where we found out that 42 bird died. And there you can see Egyptian vulture and hooded vulture died, and as well as marabou stork died. So this is a very short period of time again, and you can see the importance is ongoing. Mind you, this is a project, this is a survey done a few months ago. And we are also in the process of insulating and retrofitting of the dangerous power line along the flyway. And this is also going to be made possible in collaboration with Avenue Life project and as well as MSP project. And also we are also engaged in advocacy and stakeholder engagement. We know it is very important. So we had a consultative meeting on reconciling conservation issues with MSP projects. So we were discussing to incorporate the bird aspect in every project they were going to implement, and it went positively. The reception was very good. While we are also engaged with EU and EEP for training on environmental impact assessment and bird identification, and that also went fine because always producing some data, giving them the scientific facts only is not enough, and engagement with them in a particular manner is important. That's what happened here. And regarding the capacity building, we managed to build the capacity at EUCA, Ethiopian Wildlife and Wildlife Conservation Authority, and we also gave the park rangers training where that will help them to monitor the vulture accidents like the electrocution, the collusion. So this data will be invaluable for future projects. Also here we made a signboard, which is really important in addressing awareness issues in different parts, and also printed materials also distributed in different parts of the region to help people understand about bird conservation. Again, here the capacity building were also for 2 different schools. And when we come back to advocacy and stakeholder engagement, once again, we made a huge effort to reach a local and international audience by sponsoring and being a message sponsor in the Great Ethiopian Run, which is one of the best international events, which is conducted every year. And there 12,500 individuals were participating. And we had our message on every t-shirt, very big signboards were there. We even have dancers entertaining and conveying our message for participants, while we also have our own team running, having banner that depicted our message. We had a very good local news coverage. We reached so many people in different media outlets, but also we managed to reach 1.5 billion households internationally. That's not all. The impact went further, and we managed to convince the race organizers, and now on the Ndoto Park Predator Run, which runs for about a year, they introduced the concept of bird conservation by naming every kilometers with some common and endemic birds like liverlark and Egyptian vulture. So we also celebrated with our stakeholder and partners the World Migratory Bird Day, and environmental education program also part of our activity where we reach students and other parts of the regional stakeholders, and that went also fine. And I'm also honored to be an EDGE fellow, and I'm working on EV Egyptian vulture to increase awareness and identify and map the breeding sites. while estimating the economic repercussion of bird strikes by power lines. And this juncture, I want to wrap it up, and I would like to say thank you very much. But however, I'm waiting for your response. If you have any questions and suggestions, I'll be here to clarify and answer them.
Thank you very much, Samson, on showing how in Ethiopia you're responding to the issue of collisions and electrocutions. I know one of the dangers and threats to vultures. Thank you for giving the Ethiopian perspective. Now we're going to be crossing over to Mohammed from Morocco, from the BirdLife partner, Griffin, and he's going to be sharing the rehabilitation and rewilding efforts that are happening in Morocco. Over to you, Mohammed.
Hello, everybody. My presentation will be about vulture conservation at Jebel Moussa, northern Morocco. We'll talk about vulture restaurant, rehabilitation, and reintroduction. Not in this exact order. Why Jebel Moussa? Because it's located on one of the main migratory route between Eurasia and Africa. However, the migration of large soaring birds like vultures and storks dependent not only on small distance that separates two continents to cross the over water, which is itself a big task for these soaring birds, but it depends also about the weather. In spring, the weather on this side of Strait of Gibraltar, on Moroccan side, in autumn, it happens. This phenomenon happened in Tarifa and Algeciras, etc. in Spain. So when there is a bad weather condition for extended period, say for days, these vultures get literally stuck on this side of the strait. So many birds from April through May and June, many birds are staying in this in the Moroccan side of the strait for an extended period, for days, sometimes even a week or more. So while these are staying here, they can find sometimes food, carcasses, etc., left by mainly left by hunters, etc. But most of the time they are not enough, and they are not enough, and we will see the consequences later on. Not only Griffin vulture that get stuck in this part of the strait, but also threatened and endangered and threatened and rare in Morocco rare vulture like Saneris vulture, as we see in these pictures, black, as we call it before, they call it Eurasian black vulture, and Repels vulture, as shown in these with this arrow on sub-Saharan Africa that visits annually northern Morocco and Iberian Peninsula since especially since last few decades. There is also even another. This is a critically endangered species. There is also Egyptian vulture, an endangered species. As I said, the consequence of less food and many vultures and not enough or less food is inevitably these vultures, especially Griffin, but not always Griffin. Sometimes Saneris vulture and Repels as well get caught. So they get tired, exhausted, or for different reasons they end up mainly exhausted, and they end up in humans' hands, mainly children. So and since 2014, we started with the forestry administration. We started collecting these birds and tagging them with wing tags, etc. As you can see in this picture, we are collecting Griffin Vulture, and in this one on the right. On the right, at the time of the release, Jbel Musa is in the background. As I said before, there is Griffin Vulture on the left in this picture, and there is also Repels Vulture as well get caught and rehabilitated for a few days and released with wing tags, etc. So this is the first part about what was going on before, since a few years now. And to talk about what we will talk about later, we need to mention the status of Griffin Vulture as a breeding species in Morocco. In the 80s, there were only three. There is a study in the 80s where they only saw birds, Griffin Vulture, in three sites out of 10 known colonies, and out of these 5 were already deserted for good. So, and especially there is no sign of breeding in northern Morocco since almost 2 decades. So in February, so the reintroduction of the species is justified. So in February in 2017, Department of Water and Forests, Griffin, and our partner released 5 vulture as a trial for reintroduction of species in the area of Jbel Musa. A chain of events led to decision of by Department of Water and Forests to create the Jbel Musa, to create vulture rehabilitation center at Jbel Musa, which we can see in this picture. Which there is this is the center, this is the aviary, this is the feeding station outside of the aviary for free flying birds. Since this center and this center, everything in the including the feeding station, supplementary feeding station, since becoming operational in 2018, etc. The number of birds, especially Griffin Vulture, we found exhausted, etc., in the hand of human hands from all over the Tangier Peninsula, that is from Mediterranean coast to Tangier itself in the west, become much less frequently encountered. And we can see here Griffin Vulture and some common or northern ravens feeding on carcasses at the center. So in 2020, that is last year, in summer in June, the Forestry Administration and Griffin went to the next step in the introduction of the species, and the Forestry Administration brought vultures from a private zoo in Mohammedia to be acclimatized in Jbel Musa. They bought them in June, and in December they released them, and within almost instantly the Griffin vultures become adapted to the site and become exploring the area, doing nest site selection, doing pair formation, which started already in the aviary, but continued in the wild, and boom, we have mating recorded in photograph, as we can see in these pictures. This is obviously a very good result. So it's came much earlier, or so it's obviously a good, but it's very early to talk about success of these reintroduction project, because the objective, as we said earlier, the objective is to create a self-sustaining population, and this needs a lot of work in future. So what we do, either us or our partner, what we do to make sure these, and for both migratory birds passing through the area and local birds, local vulture we have in a Griffin currently working on a project financed by COPF on maintenance and improvement of traditional pastoral practices for conservation of vulture at Jebel Moussa. Among the activities is creation of additional vulture restaurant, maintaining water spring and water point like this, some small ponds near the springs. Before this project, this spring is practically the only one good enough to hold water to be used for vultures bathing and drinking, etc., and other wildlife as well. This is the example of water stream that needs to be maintained, and this is from the same project, from the small pond that was created recently, and you can see it's recent. We will continue doing research on vulture migration. That includes also Griffin vulture and Repels vultures and African white-backed vultures like these individual, which we GPS tagged a few months ago, and it practically traveled all over Morocco before going southwards toward its breeding area, coming through Western Algeria, between Western Algeria and Mauritania. In the COPF project, we will tag more vultures, and we will also color ring vulture as well. Finally, as I said before, the project is a core partner of the project at the Department of Water and Forests and Griffin, but there is many partners involved in one aspect of the project or the other, and we can see these three partners. VBN is a key partner ensuring financing the early works of Griffin, not early since the release of the birds. That's already from 2017. The Moroccan Association for Conservation of Raptors contributed a lot technically to the released birds, and they contribute also their GPS tags from their project. And as we said in the last at the end of the COPF project, as we already just mentioned at the end of there are other, as I said, there are other partners who contributed in this aspect, and this aspect they are which we mentioned them in other context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for sharing what's happening in Morocco. And obviously, rehabilitation is an important aspect of part of our voucher recovery plans. Over to you, Kariuki.
Hi, Fadzai. I think we may have lost Kariuki. Maybe he's got a problem with his internet.
Okay, so in that case, shall we move across to the question and answer session?
Yes, just absolutely. Before we move on, in his stead, I just want to say thank you to all the presenters today for sharing all of that information with us. And as you can see, we've got a lot of efforts ongoing across the region through the partnership, working really, really hard to address the various and myriad threats that vultures are facing. And we also wanted to announce during this session today that we're very excited about the BirdLife Africa Vulture Conservation Forum, which is being launched next week to celebrate International Vulture Awareness Day and to also celebrate the great work that the partnership is doing so that we can continue with our various collaborators, because it takes all of us to make a difference for vultures, to learn lessons, scale up the impact, because we need urgent action now and we need a lot of it, as you can see. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Fadzai. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Salisha. We're all looking forward to the launch of the Vulture Conservation Forum, and thanks to all our panelists. So here we go with the question and answers that have been coming quite a lot. So the first question is one that came through from Joshua Muchunga. In our vulture conservation endeavors, how are we engaging the power generation and transmission agencies and poisons, manufacturing and supplies, value chains to mainstream African vulture conservation in their area, in their activities? So looking at mainstreaming vulture conservation into transmission, into probably energy, into the energy sector, as well as the poisons manufacturing and supplies value chains. Do you want to take that one, Salisha?
So,
sorry,
Yeah.
Samson. Sorry, Samson. Go ahead.
Okay, that's really a good question. From our experience, what we are trying to do is we try to engage the important stakeholders, that is the Ethiopian Electric Power, as well as the Ethiopian Electric Utility. Ethiopian Electric Utility is responsible to distribute the power and also dealing with the market. But why we do this is there is also a power interruption because of the bird strike, and that costs money also. So we try to make them into their interests so that they come on board, and we'll go together forward. And also the new structure, the power infrastructure to be built needs some kind of innovation beforehand. So since we're giving them the information at hand without any extra cost in the future, they will be in a greater position with the training that they have, and with a particular time. It will help a lot in bringing them together for one common cause. And it's not that much of money intensive activity, so they acknowledge that. That's why they are on board. But regarding the poison, well, the way actually I see it is like to have a legislation, a very good legislation that prohibits those hazardous chemicals from getting into the country at the first place. We do this by advocacy and providing a policy brief, as well as producing a national reviewed material that supports decision makers, and we are also engaged on that. And what really matters is a highly effective data. In order to make a highly decisive decision, we need the data, and we are extremely working on that. And it will be second nature once we have this to to the implementers. So we are doing this both things to mainstream it into different sectors. I think we'll be in a good position in the coming year or two. And I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. Just to add to that, Fadzai, I think there's there's the BirdLife Africa Energy Forum that our colleague Alex Ngari of the Flyways program also runs. So because electricity, it hits a lot of other birds as well and other raptors. So it's a very important and cross-cutting issue that has been raised. And through that forum, we're engaging with the power and transmission agencies. And obviously, we're not the only ones. There are also a lot of other conservation organizations doing the same. I don't know if Gasheru, you want to add anything from your perspective.
Thank you, Salisha. I think I would add more on the use of readily available pesticides. It's a rather more or less complicated scenario because people buy readily available pesticides for their agricultural use, and the misuse of this becomes quite a difficult way of being able to control it. And in Kenya, we have been able to influence policy where there's been a subsidiary law entrenched within the Wildlife Act, which indicates which spell out that poisoning is a crime, and poisoning of wildlife is a crime which is punishable by law, and therefore that by itself helps in people using the pesticides that they have at home in the right way. And we hope that this will continue across board within different households within the country. On the other hand, on issues of power lines and within our country, we have recently working with partners across within Kenya, developed a strategic there's a draft strategic environment assessment for wind power and biodiversity, which is a step forward towards ensuring that power lines and oncoming wind farms are correctly positioned or correctly located, and mitigating significant losses through collisions and electrocutions. So all this is at policy level, and the implementation now is what remains for us to see that is done correctly. Thank you.
Thank you, Salisha, Samson, and Paul for responding to that question. The next one is for you, Clara. Is it difficult to persuade communities or landowners to set up a vulture safe zone? What motivates landowners in your experience? Question came from Liz.
Thanks so much, Liz, for the question, and thanks, Fadzai. So the scenario from the Zambian side has been that most of the landowners actually do not know that vultures are that important. And so it has become easier over time. And since we introduced the Vulture Safe Zones initiative in 2016, we have a lot more interest from the landowners themselves, bringing themselves out because they are extremely excited and they are enthusiastic to be part of the initiative. They see this as a cheap way to dispose of their carcass, as well as they enjoy, like we said in our presentation, it becomes some form of, it presents their land as part of a spot for an excursion, because the act of the vultures feeding is extremely exciting and they want to see that. So the ones that know, the landowners that get to know, that are aware about the importance or the initiative of the Vulture Safe Zones, they're extremely excited and they are extremely keen to be a part of it, and nobody wants to be left behind once they know and are aware of it.
Fantastic, Clara. Thank you so much for that response. And for you, Joseph, here's a comment coming through in the chat box. One thing that quickly stood out for me in the Nigerian case, that is the belief-based use, is how the treated animals are displayed in the open on market stalls, and in Zimbabwe, only plants are displayed with animal parts hidden away in trunks. Just a comment with regards to the issue on belief-based use coming from the Zimbabwean Nigerian experience. Then a quick question from Namibia. What kinds of experience do you have in Nigeria and Namibia to combat wildlife poisoning, particularly in delivering veterinary services? Is there any organization specifically responsible to react with such kinds of incidences? It's actually Million from Ethiopia who has posed that question. The experience that we have in Nigeria, in Namibia, probably is a partnership to combat wildlife poisoning, particularly in delivering veterinary services. And is there any organization specifically responsible to react with such kinds of incidences?
Okay, should I go?
Go, Joseph, go for it.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so wildlife poisoning is not a major problem in Nigeria. It's just part of the little problem, but we are majorly focused on the belief-based part of the poisoning. And so we've not really established an agency, let me put it that way, to be able to do that. But what we've done so far is to try to create awareness to the farmers that are using these veterinary medicine, veterinary drugs, to make sure that they don't they use it correctly, because most of these drugs actually are banned, and they get them from the black market. So as I said, that's just a minor part of the major thing that we are dealing with here in Nigeria, and our focus is on the belief-based use.
Thank you very much, Joseph, for your response. I don't see any of the other panelists coming to respond to that. So we're going to go with our last question for the day. If your question is not answered, please feel free to send it through the chat box. We'll still respond to your questions. Then the last question is coming from Derek. His question is concerned: how are governments and policymakers in African countries involved in vulture conservation? This one I think applies to all of our panelists. Maybe just in 30 seconds, starting with you, Paul. Then I'll go to Clara, I'll go to Mohammed, Samson, Joseph, just in brief 30 seconds, and I'll round it off with you, Salisha, on that one. Yeah.
So here in Kenya, we are signatories to the CBD, to the CMS, among other global conventions that vultures are enlisted. And we are working towards that these vultures have been entrenched within our national law, and we are currently reviewing our current wildlife policy. So we are ensuring that this is entrenched within our national policy, therefore responding to the national and global elements of vulture conservation. Thank you.
On the Zambian end, the government is involved, especially in protected areas where we have vultures. They take part in monitoring and sighting and reciting of tagged vultures. They as well have been involved in poison response trainings. We are equally at a point where we're reviewing our Wildlife Act, and we are advocating that part of the poisoning and all the issues around that are incorporated in that. Thanks a lot.
So as NCF, we are very much involved with the government, and they are a stakeholder in the what we deal with, and we're currently involved. As I said, the vulture belief-based use that we are talking about, we're trying to make sure that it's institutionalized as part of the illegal wildlife trade strategy that is currently being developed, and so that it will have that institutional buy-in, so that we'll be able to have it and backed by law, so that it will be easy for us to have that implemented here in Nigeria. So institutionalizing it is one of the areas that we're trying to do, and we have the backing of the government, and we work very closely with the government in that.
Actually, here also, it's more or less the same, but the thing is, approaching it from one side only won't help. So what we believe in is a cross-sectional approach. So every government offices should incorporate in this regard, because of two reasons. Well, first of all, the human labor will be really diminished, and at the same time, the money that's going to be spent also will decrease. So this will help a lot. So the approach is going to be a cross-sectional one by involving different government offices to work for the same cause. So in every sector, the vulture issue will go into different sections, which is really, really important in the national economy. So that approach should be followed, and we strive to do that.
Mohammed? Okay. Looks like we've lost audio from Mohammed. So I'll round off this question with you, Salisha.
Sure, but I was going to actually bounce it to you, Fadzai, being the country in Africa that has a national vulture action plan. I think you must answer as well.
From our perspective, in Zimbabwe, the government is highly involved in vulture conservation. First of all, through legislation, vultures are specially protected species under the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Act, which guarantees their protection to the fullest extent of the law. So basically, the protection of vultures is entrenched in our legislation. Secondly, we are, I would like to brag, still the only African country with a vulture action plan. So with the full weight of the government behind it and fully committed to the implementation and the actions that are outlined in the vulture action plan. And obviously the protection of vultures that is granted to them within the protected area system in our country, and also responding to issues of illegal wildlife trade and poaching, which also benefits vultures in these different areas where they occur. So that's a little bit from the Zimbabwean perspective, Salisha.
Thank you, Fadzai. As you can see, each country has their own approach and manner in which they're engaging with the policies and laws of the land and the politics of the land. There is also obviously the multilateral agreements like the Convention for Migratory Species, and also regional bodies such as ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States, etc., we are also involved with that, and CITES to raise the profile of vultures, the issues that are happening with them, so that people that are parties to that, or countries that are parties to those conventions or parties to those various regional bodies, including the South Africa Development Community, all also, we engage at that level in the policy making, so that vultures are, vulture conservation can be seen at that level, considering that they're such vital creatures, and for both the economy as well as our health. So that's how we do it on the regional side. Thanks, Fadzai.
Everybody, we thank you for joining us, and thank you for your question and answers. Keep them coming. We'll still respond to them. You've got our contact details in the registration link, so we'll still respond. Cross over to you, Salisha, now.
Thank you so much, Fadzai, for being such a wonderful moderator for us today. And negotiating all of that. And thank you to all the panelists again for taking the time to make these presentations and sharing the brilliant work that you all are doing in your various countries. And also thank you to everyone who's been listening today, and to the people who have been supporting us in this journey that we are on to help vultures soar again, especially as Kariuki had mentioned at the beginning, the A.G. Leventis Foundation and Tassa Leventis, the Isdell Family Foundation, which is Pamela and Evelyn Cara, and the EU Life program, the IUCN SOS program, and also the species champions and the various people who continue to support us through the vulture appeals that we have. And if you're interested in this conservation efforts after we've explained to you the importance of these vultures and the work that we're doing, it's a long journey ahead, and we need all of you. So please, please keep supporting us. Thank you.